The visit of President Xi to Saudi Arabia was a monumental event and could set the stage for a renewed attempt at de-dollarization of the energy markets. And if that happens, all bets are off.
Welcome to Wealthion. I'm Wealthion founder Adam Taggart. Today's guest frequently makes the statement, energy is life. Well, 2022 certainly proved that statement true in spades. The spokeschicken for the crack team of energy analysts at Doomberg joins us here to provide their latest outlook on the global energy situation. Is it more likely to improve or worsen from here? What are the most important energy trends we should be paying attention to right now? How will the energy story impact markets in 2023? And are there opportunities for today's investors to take advantage of? Doomberg, thanks so much for joining us today. Let's start with your high-level assessment of the world energy situation. What has your attention most right now?
Hey, Adam, first of all, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Great to be back with you. Always enjoy our lively discussions. Looking forward to kicking off the 2023 calendar year with you. You're our first podcast of the year, and so it's fitting that we're doing this literally on the first day back in the office for both of us, I suspect. To your question, right now, at least in the short term, obviously all eyes on the weather, and all eyes on the weather, particularly in Europe. And as we put out in our latest piece, The Whims of Gaia, the Europeans entered the winter of 2022-2023 needing salvation from the weather gods, and so far it looks like those gods have delivered in spades, and it really is a unseasonably warm weather across all of Europe. If you look today, the heat map and the deviations from historical averages are pretty pronounced. Multiple sigma moves away from the average to the warm side, which is bringing a very much welcomed diversion away from the consumption of natural gas at a rate that would cause them to become depleted prematurely. And on the flip side, the East Coast had a cold snap, and the grid in New England wobbled quite a bit, and there's also some troubles in Texas. And it goes to show you that cold snaps that would be typically characterized as winter in the Northeast now are really sort of 24-hour major events on the Weather Channel because of the consequences and just how close those grids came to collapsing, frankly. And at one point in New England, which is a stat that just boggles the mind, some 40% of the electricity being produced in the New England network was being produced by the combustion of oil, sort of back to the future again here, using dirty oil to make electricity. And so that's the big trend right now in the next weeks and months is will the warm weather in Europe hold, and will Europe get through to the springtime where they'll have to rebuild inventories once again heading into next winter, which will be the real test. But that's where we are today in the energy markets. It's all about the weather.
Wow. So very two timely topics. First off, Europe. I mean, how big of a bullet have the Europeans dodged so far? Because this was one of the questions I was going to ask you. Is we were going into this winter incredibly fearful about loss of life and countries maybe having to shut down industry just to reroute energy to keep people warm. Sounds like they haven't had to take those type of drastic measures because the weather's been so unseasonably mild. I mean, is this just almost sort of like the hand of God coming down and just a Deus ex machina sort of saving of the folks from Europe here, or were maybe the expectations I mentioned a little too dire going in?
Well, let's take a step back and look what happened. First of all, the Germans and the Europeans in general, set about the task of buying every BTU of energy, regardless of carbon footprint or price paid. And so during key times in December, when the weather was sort of on average, as opposed to the warm spell that we've got now, the German grid was among the dirtiest in the developed world. It was burning coal as its major primary source of fuel. What happened in Germany, of course, is during the winter, they have these doldrums, and the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. And so the grid at key points during December was really just amazingly carbon intense. Burning coal at record speed. The speed with which they were able to bring back online old coal plants is really phenomenal, and congratulations to them. But also, Adam, in addition to that, they spent almost $500 billion on this effort. And as we said in our piece, that $500 billion could have bought them a generation's worth of state-of-the-art nuclear power plants with plenty of money to spare. And instead, it was basically squandered on 1 year's worth of oil, natural gas, and coal. And so the gods of the weather blessing Europeans, as we warned in the piece, like one of the dangers of dodging the bullet and spending as much money as they have to get their population through the winter is that the policymakers might learn all of the wrong lessons and decide that they don't need to change course. When in fact, I think, in the investing world and the gambling world, your expected value is the probability of something happening times the consequences of it if it did. Regardless of how the gamble actually plays out, the expected value of the risk they took on was extraordinarily high. And so we would like it if the Europeans got through the winter and most of the worst case scenario risks, erased from the equation. But if they do that and then they just go about doubling down on their failed policies that got them here in the first place, and that's the worst of all worlds, because ultimately, one of the times that you roll the dice, it's not going to come in your favor. And then, we'll be right back to the starting blocks again, handling the next big crisis.
Yeah, there was a class that we had to take in my business school. I can't remember the exact title, but we all just called it non-markets. And it was all about non-market factors. So these are things like policy changes, regulations, stuff like that. Things that could change the natural operation of free markets. And nobody was interested in taking the class. But in retrospect, I think it's probably one of the most valuable classes we had to take there, because that seems to really be what's been driving a lot of the action in certainly now in places like Europe with the energy markets, but even just in the financial markets with all the central bank intervention. And to your point, I just want to make it clear for folks listening here that everything we're talking about is largely rooted in policy that a lot of European states, Germany probably being at the vanguard of this, made in terms of being overly aggressive, and I think folks would say overly naive in their plans to transition into a more, quote, green energy grid. And they did it in a way that made them very vulnerable to developments that have happened in the past year. And as a result, you're saying, hey, first they were, caught flat-footed and vulnerable to the loss of life and loss of industry that we just talked about a minute or two ago. And the tactics that they've had to take in scrambling to deal with that have dramatically been in complete opposition to their initial policy goals, right? As you said, they've just returned to much more dirty forms of energy and much more expensive, right? As well. And to your point there, that part of what happened to Germany is they started decommissioning their nuclear fleet in favor of these alternative energy sources like wind and solar that A, are intermittent, B, cannot generate as much of the output as the nuclear fleet could. And you're basically saying what they have just had to spend in scrambling on dirty energy, which they didn't want in the first place, well, they could have invested that, granted it would have taken more time, but they could have invested that in completely upgrading a brand new nuclear fleet and basically had, zero emission, much more stable, dependable energy sources going forward. But now they're potentially caught in a cycle here where, every time the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow, they're going to return to much more dirtier forms of energy.
Yeah, let me give you a couple of stats that'll blow your mind. One is that the German solar industry publishes, very detailed data around its productivity and so on. And there's a concept in the energy markets known as the capacity factor, which is the percent of the nameplate capacity that you actually produce at integrated over time. And so for a nuclear reactor, one of the reasons why they're so fantastic is if you run them correctly, like the Germans and the Americans do, you can run your nuclear power plants at a 92, 93% capacity factor. So for most of the time, it's producing steady baseload predictable power, and the 7% offline time is for planned maintenance and scheduled, and it's very rare that you would see the nuclear reactor unexpectedly go offline. Conversely, with solar, of course, the sun doesn't shine at night, and the sun isn't very intense in Germany to begin with, and certainly not during the winter doldrums, as we just described earlier. Integrated over the entire year, the solar capacity factor for Germany is 11%. You can now it's in the U.S., for example, in California and Florida and Arizona and Texas, where the sun is intense and it shines a lot. The best run commercial solar fields have a capacity factor approaching 30%. And so solar, with people, the sleight of hand of this, here's how much installed capacity we have. But the dirty little secret of the solar industry is that the capacity factors are woeful, and especially in Germany, which means you have to essentially install 10 times as much solar nameplate capacity in order to produce roughly the same amount that nuclear power would. But the problem with that approach, of course, is when the sun is shining, you produce more energy than you need. And when it isn't, you still basically they're at night you can't. There's no circumventing, absent some breakthrough in storage, that capacity factor limitation and the intermittency issues you described earlier. The second stat that'll blow your mind is just how out of normal the current bout of warm weather is in Germany. And maybe we'll throw this chart up, but I'll send you a link to it. But in Frankfurt, which is sort of a standard city to measure as a proxy for German weather, late last week, as the new year turned, the daytime high in Frankfurt was in the low 60s. And historically, wow, the 90th percentile band, where like 90% of the time it's below this band, is like 51 or 52 degrees Fahrenheit. And last week it was in the upper 60s and the lower 60s. The lows were at the 90th percentile of the daytime highs. The lows typically right now are around 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and the lows last week were around 55 degrees. And so you don't need to burn much natural gas when you're running 30, 40 degrees over average. And then thankfully, what we're seeing in Europe, as we pointed out in our piece, the Whims of Gaia, they are taking this opportunity to continue to restock natural gas during a time when natural gas would normally be being depleted. And so that's why you're still seeing pretty elevated LNG cargo prices, somewhere around $35 today per million BTU compared to $5 per million BTU in the US. It's because they're not taking any chances correctly. But that's just, they're paying the clearing price for every BTU of energy they can find, regardless of carbon footprint. And it's working, and good for them. Like, this was the correct decision to make. But that $500 billion bill was paid, and it's making the industry uncompetitive and all of the things that we're worried about. But I wouldn't call being forced to spend $500 billion to, quote, make it through the winter a victory.
Right, an admirable or sustainable energy policy. Yeah,
this needs to be addressed and needs to be addressed urgently.
Yeah. Wow. So first off, the $35 for natural gas, while elevated by 7 times from sort of its historic average, just to be clear, that has come down a fair amount from the crazy spikes we saw earlier, right?
Yeah, it peaked out at 100, and I'm just pulling it up. Right now, it's actually down to 27, so that's well off the highs. The historical average for LNG is a lot higher than it is for the $5 number I was quoting you. That's sort of pipeline natural gas at Henry Hub in the U.S. LNG historically was probably closer to the teens, $15 per million BTU, because there's substantial shipping, shipping costs. Well, the whole process of first chilling, then shipping, then regasifying, each step comes with an expense. And to the question at hand, which is trends in 2023 and beyond in the energy markets, I think one of the major mega trends, which is something we detailed for our Pro Tier subscribers in our year in review talk a couple of weeks ago, is the continued harmonization of the natural gas markets. I mean, ultimately, as this wave of LNG import and export terminal construction comes to completion, we're going to see global natural gas prices, and I believe global energy prices in general, harmonize to a pretty thin band, where the width of that band is the cost of shipping natural gas around the world. Other factors that we're watching very carefully for 2023 and beyond, of course, is the price of coal. And as we mentioned, at its apex, Germany, at the apex of the cold snap in December, Germany was burning coal as its primary source of energy, and has done a miraculous job of bringing those old plants back online. The price of coal on an energy basis is still higher than the price of oil, which is pretty amazing. At least the Newcastle contract out of Australia. We're seeing the same thing in China. The energy crisis in Europe spread to China, and China is burning coal with abandon and buying up every BTU of coal it can get its hands on and opening up coal mines domestically. So this attempt at greening up the grid has inevitably, as it always seems to do, ended up with a browner grid than you had in the first place, and especially in Germany, where they just stripped themselves of their nuclear reactors, in a weird national suicide mission.
Yeah, I mean, so for those of us that sort of continuously harp on the dangers of short-sighted or nearsighted energy policy, this is a classic example why, right? It's because it's the unintended consequences that more often than should result from nearsighted government policy. And to your point, the whole intent here behind this was to move to a greener global energy system. And as you said, we're actually making it more brown in this process.
Yeah, and everywhere it's tried, this is what happens. So look at New England, as we mentioned. They too have been on a mission to shut down their nuclear reactors, basically running the European energy playbook. And as we mentioned in the piece, they were a little less lucky with the weather in late December. It's something I'm sure you're personally familiar with, and many who live in the Midwest and the East Coast and the Deep South experienced a freeze of historic proportions. At least for the Deep South, this was a multi-sigma move. For Boston, what's the excuse, right? Boston, in Boston, this is just weather. But in Boston, in New England, again, as we mentioned, they were burning oil for 40% of their electricity production at the apex of the snap. And luckily, again, in New England, the weather has since turned for the better, and a warm spout has replaced the cold snap. As the weather does, it shifts, it cycles. And so the concept of burning oil in a modern, it just blows the mind that 40% of electricity in the ISO network in New England was coming from burning of dirty oil. And
right, it's totally unnecessary. And sorry to interrupt you, but yeah. In your answer here, you have written a lot on your Substack about how New England the Northeast is very rich in natural gas, but it's very poorly infrastructured to actually use that natural gas, right? Which hence is why it has to rely on oil and pinches like this.
Well, worse than that, they're right next door to the Appalachia, where you have the world's basically largest natural gas resources, and they have steadfastly opposed and in many cases worked to take down existing pipelines. And so if you look at the U.S. natural gas pipeline map, the entire region of New England looks woefully underserved compared to the rest of the Midwest, which is happily making its way through winter without any issues. But we are blessed enough to live in the Midwest, and the pipeline storage, the amount of natural gas stored, or what the weather is going to do, is of minimal consequence to us when we're thinking about energy security, whereas it's a crisis in New England today, which is really just unacceptable. And so back to our expected value calculation, there's going to come a point where we are going to see rolling blackouts in the Northeast at the worst possible time, when residents need heat to keep their homes operating normally. And it's just a matter of time, and it's rather unfortunate. And in the Northeast, basically many of the homes are heated with diesel fuel, and now we have a diesel shortage. And we're just rolling from one near miss to the next. And unfortunately, we suspect and anticipate and bemoan the fact that eventually we're going to have snake eyes come up when we roll the dice, and it's going to be suddenly a scandal that everybody finds unacceptable. And just, it's frustrating to see, but it is what it is.
It is what it is. So just in this case of New England, and then I want to jump back to Europe for a second. What has been the logic, and I'm saying that in air quotes, to be so anti-gas when they are so vulnerable, and when they find themselves vulnerable, they return to even dirtier sources?
I would say at its core, and Alex Epstein has done a very good job of chronicling this, the issue is the opposition to fossil fuels is always presented as though they provide no benefits whatsoever. And so you cannot make a trade-off calculation. A priori, fossil fuels are evil and must be eliminated, regardless of what the replacement looks like and what the implications are of the replacements on offer, be it cost, reliability, grid stability, etc. And so with that as a mindset, you cannot have an intelligent, rational discussion. There are no solutions in the energy space. There are only trade-offs. which is why we harp so much on the nonsense of the fear around, say, nuclear waste, because that's a trade-off. We know how to handle it. We can't find anybody who's ever died from nuclear waste. There's tons of people who have died producing oil and gas or making, using slave labor to make solar panels in China. Like, these are all trade-offs. How do we compare the safe handling of a relatively small amount of nuclear waste with our moral objections to the use of dirty coal and slave labor to make cheap solar panels in China? And so in the mindset of many in New England and in California and in Europe and in Australia, fossil fuels offer no benefits. Their downsides are radically exaggerated, and therefore they just need to be eliminated, period. And the quicker, the better. And our point of view, and I think you share it, is that, this is not how intelligent people make decisions. You carefully weigh the pros and cons of the options available to you. And then collectively as a society, after an intelligent debate, we select the most viable based on our priorities and our ethics and our trade-offs between what kind of standard of living we wish to provide our citizens and what damage we're going to do to the planet to achieve that standard of living. But absent from the debate is any recognition whatsoever that fossil fuels offer any positive benefits. They're just evil that needs to be eliminated. And that's how you get into situations like this.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, an energy analyst like yourself pays a lot of attention to this and notices the cost of being wrong, right? Where they return back to these even dirtier fossil sources in highly inefficient ways, both from an emission standpoint, but from a cost standpoint as well. Is the public beginning to become aware of this yet? Because it seems like sentiment's not going to shift, obviously, until enough of the public really starts demanding a different type of solution.
I don't think so. And as we mentioned in our piece, the worst possible outcome would be, broadly speaking, people who are raising the alarm bells are viewed as alarmists. And the set of decisions that put us in this situation become emboldened, as opposed to something that needs to be nullified, in the sense that, oh, look, we made it just fine through the winter. The average citizen in New England has no idea they were burning 40%. Oil was generating 40% of their electricity during the last cold snap. I guarantee you that the hardcore environmentalists probably don't know, and would be surprised to learn that fact. We're in the details, right? And we do this for a living. We create content, we analyze, we go on podcasts, we talk about it. The average person on the street knows that with this last cold snap, the grid didn't come down. There weren't rolling blackouts, and so they were fine. And so then maybe the warnings of, hey, if this was 5 degrees colder or lasted for another day and a half, you would have seen rolling blackouts, and you would have seen significant stress dealt out to the citizens of the region. If they knew that, maybe they would behave differently. But in their mind, it was just another storm, and everything was fine. And in Europe, if this really good spell of warm weather continues, ironically, of course, saved by global warming, it could again lead them to learn all the wrong lessons from this, and it just kick the can down the road to the inevitable cold snap that breaks the system.
Yeah, and so on that real quick, are they through the worst of it at this point? I mean, it's still just the beginning of January. I know that January through March is still pretty dang cold in a lot of places in Europe. Germany especially. I actually just spent a number of winters traveling to Germany for a previous job many years ago, and it is bitter cold there. I mean, folks don't really realize how far north the north of Germany is.
It can be. So here's the thing. There are two equations at play. There's the integral of the amount of energy they need, and then there's the maximum amount of energy that they can extract on any given day. If you have a cold enough set of days, the amount of natural gas you have in storage is almost irrelevant, because there's a fixed rate at which that gas can be extracted and used.
Right.
And so if they have a cold enough spell in January or February, we still could see rolling blackouts and so on. But I would say with each passing day where above average warm weather is in place, the worst case scenario risks of an extended period of literally running out of natural gas in this case are being abated, and we should be cheering that, regardless of whether that outcome validates a previous prediction of ours or not. Our primary concern is for the thousands of paying subscribers that we have in Europe, and that they live a good, healthy life, and we're pro-human as a team. But the worst case scenario risks are being taken off the board, with the major caveat being that the imposition of a substantial strain on the market, the point source could still be in significant stress, but the integral is looking to be pretty good. And as we said in the last few days, Germany has been stocking natural gas in its storage units when it should be destocking them at an accelerating rate based on historical averages, as the chart we showed in the piece, and we'll send you that too, as the chart we showed in the piece clearly dictates.
All right, it's so interesting because there is this law, we've been talking about it a lot in this program recently, in the markets where when all the experts think one thing, it's almost a guarantee that something else is going to happen. So many people, understandably, were super concerned about reserves basically running dry, and this was a quarter or two ago as folks were looking towards the winter. So interesting now where we're at the place where they're still continuing to fill them at this time in the winter, which historically is when they're beginning to get low. So it just goes to show that the universe is always going to be tossing curveballs our way here. So here's the question I've been waiting to ask you about Europe, which is particularly Germany, is we've been talking a lot about natural gas. You and I, the last time I think we had you on this channel, Doomberg, was before the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline. So I'd be remiss not to ask you, how material a development is that? And what are the long-term implications from that going to be, do you think?
In our view, it all depends on how and whether peace is achieved in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And this is intertwined with the G7 effort to cap the price of oil, for example, that Russia sells to third parties. So if we have a prolonged conflict and we don't achieve peace, then the lack of Nord Stream 1 in particular will be pretty catastrophic in our view, because much of the gas being burned today, of course, was originally put in storage after having passed through those pipelines that go under the sea and connect Germany directly to Russia. The destruction of the Nord Stream 1 pipeline is substantial if conflict continues and peace is not achieved and the spigots aren't turned back on between Russia and Germany in particular. Don't forget, Nord Stream 2 is actually still potentially operational. It's never been put into service, but it looks like it is in decent shape. And if peace were to break out in the war between Ukraine and Russia, however unlikely that may seem, things could change pretty quickly. And just to emphasize something you just said about Germany restacking natural gas now, during the cold spell that happened in December, gas was being tapped at a really alarming rate. The slope of the descent before the recent restocking was pretty pronounced, and that's what we would be worried about if we do get a cold snap. But to your question about what does the future hold, it all is really predicated on whether and how peace is achieved in the war between Russia and Ukraine, and whether the spigots are reopened in the critical arteries that remain. There's a very large pipeline that flows through Ukraine, of course, which is one of the reasons why Ukraine is geopolitically so relevant in all of this conflict, and then one that that flows through Belarus and so on. So the land pipelines are still in place, and amazingly have not been, say, attacked by either party or terrorists. But the destruction of Nord Stream 1, which was one of the primary ways in which natural gas made its way from Russia to Germany, would certainly be extraordinarily consequential if the conflict continues, and especially the economic side of the conflict, where Russia decides not to send its natural gas to Europe. And importantly, one last point is, the pipelines are being laid to bring much of the energy commodities from, the shipment from Russia to Europe is being replaced with new arteries that are going to feed China. And once that's complete, then all bets are off.
And you say new pipelines that are going to feed China. Those are pipelines that Russia is building to send gas to China?
China is building to extract gas from Russia would probably be a more accurate description of it. And the Chinese know how to build infrastructure projects at a rate that is unthinkable to us, especially when they're properly motivated. And the recent trip of President Xi to Saudi Arabia, we think is a critically important milestone here as you look at the nexus between Russia, China, and Saudi Arabia on a go-forward basis. You're going to see a complete rewiring of these energy markets that are going to have profound impacts on the world going forward.
All right, I want to dig into that in just a moment too, but a couple sort of rapid fire questions about Nord Stream. I believe we don't sort of have an official verdict on this, so I'm going to ask you to speculate here. But how likely is it that the actual attack on the pipeline was done by a Western power to basically tell Russia, hey, stay in your lane, bro?
It's a fascinating sort of thing to observe people speculate in the early times of this event, and just how consequential it would or it would not be. And more importantly, as you alluded to, who did it. And immediately, of course, the Western intelligence community blamed Russia and said that they blew up their own pipelines. We find this a little bit difficult to believe and express that doubt early on. It's quite the whodunit. I think everybody knows who did it. I don't know who did it because I'm not in the intelligence community, and they certainly wouldn't tell me. But if you look at the subset of people who benefited from it versus who were punished by it, there's only so many characters who could have done it. And I think it's pretty safe to say that Russia didn't blow up their own pipeline. And basically, if you'll notice, that story is kind of slipped away from the mainstream.
Oh, it's been totally removed from the headlines. Yeah, exactly.
It's stuck down the memory hole. If we had conclusive evidence of Putin blowing up his own pipeline, I don't doubt for a second that we would have seen it. So I think we could comfortably rule out him, which means you have to rule in certain others.
Okay, so going from that is let's say peace does break out, hopefully. Assuming for a moment that it was a Western power that did this, how willing / confident do you think Russia would be to fix the damage and resuscitate the pipeline if it now feels like, hey, anytime we kind of run afoul of the West, they're just going to blow this thing up again?
Yeah, I mean, that's why when we first published on the piece, it was really stunning that the pipelines were destroyed. It risks an escalation that could be extraordinarily consequential. Very shortly, in a related event, the Freeport LNG export facility also experienced an explosion, and there's been some rumblings about the cause of that. We had this Keystone pipeline damaged recently. We're seeing a series of targeted attacks on our energy infrastructure in the U.S., in particular our electricity infrastructure. If we decide to engage in sort of a guerrilla war, attacking other countries' energy infrastructure, this very quickly gets out of hand and could cause significant challenges, right? And so this is something, of course, we're very fearful of, and it's something to keep a close eye on. And so, yeah, to your question, how motivated will they be? Well, again, they've already committed that they won't be selling oil to anybody who's participating in this, what we think is this crazy oil price cap scheme. And so who knows? I mean, once the pipelines are set where gas can flow from Russia to China, what would be the motivation? They already took his reserves. And look, I mean, I want to say wholeheartedly, I think Putin was very foolish to roll into Ukraine. I think this was a terrible miscalculation on his part and a blunder. And part of the reason why he was motivated to do so is we handed him all of our energy cards. And so there we have it. That's where we are today. But what the relationship looks like, I don't think there's going to be a significant appetite, absent a complete change of leadership in Russia and some miraculous turn of events where we have a Western-friendly, democratically aligned leader of a renewed Russian state. I don't know that Putin would be very motivated to sell to the Europeans, and I don't think the Europeans are all that motivated to buy from him. And so I think long-term, we're going to see sort of permanent changes in the flows of energy, and there will be consequences to that, both good and bad.
Okay, and that really is the big story here, not I think just for 2023, but for the next decade or several, right? Is that sort of longstanding energy flows globally are getting redrawn right now. And as an increasing number of our guests have been saying, had a long discussion with this with Felix Zulauf not that long ago, that the world is becoming much more bifurcated / bipolar, where it's sort of, Team West and then, Team, I guess you could say East, or Team BRICS, or Team Russia, China, and friends. So as you look towards, well, first I should check in to make sure that you see the world similarly, and if you do, as you look through that lens, what are sort of the biggest trends, developments you expect to manifest over the coming decades?
Sure. So I think it's instructive to reference your viewers to a piece that was recently put out by Zoltan over at Credit Suisse, which really was a pretty amazing piece. I don't know if you've seen it, but he describes...
This is Zoltan Poznar from,
Yeah.
Pozar from Credit Suisse, right?
Yeah, who's been writing, when we read the piece, it sort of felt like a summary of 7 years of Luke Gromen's work over at Forest for the Trees. But in his view, and as we alluded to earlier, the visit of President Xi to Saudi Arabia was a monumental event and could set the stage for a renewed attempt at de-dollarization of the energy markets. And if that happens, all bets are off. And of course, we don't expect that the U.S. would sit back and take this lightly or allow it to transpire. And we're already seeing sort of concessions to Saudi Arabia, a whispered deal of immunity for MBS in exchange for more amenable policy on the part of OPEC Plus that the White House would like to see. But time will tell. And in our predictions to our pro tier, we said, if this does continue at the rate that it is continuing, this effort at de-dollarization and settling international trade in say the petro-yuan instead of the petrodollar, as Zoltan calls it, radically increases the likelihood of armed conflict over Taiwan, in our view. Just historically, whenever there are significant movements against the dollar, war quickly follows in a weird coincidence, and we suspect that we'll see that today.
All right. Let's all hope that doesn't happen. But we have to, as you say, have our eyes open for the potentiality of it, because historically oil has been the lifeblood of the global economy, and it's something that the U.S. is just always, in many cases understandably so, just really aggressively protected here. I guess my question to you, Doomberg, is do you see the dominance of the petrodollar and the dominance that the U.S. has been able to enforce over the supply of both oil but other fossil fuels as well? Is it reasonable to think that can continue to be maintained in the type of future you see us going into, or is it almost inevitable that increasing competition is going to happen?
That's the big question of the day. And I listen to some of the deepest thinkers like Felix Zulauf, who you mentioned, and I read Zoltan. He's not on many podcasts, and then of course there's, the Brent Johnsons of the world over at Santiago Capital, who I know you know well, who believe, that the US dollar's prominence will be maintained for a lot longer than people think. If you pushed me, I would say that the strength of the dominance of the US dollar and the historical track record of the country's willingness to enforce it using all manner of tools, both political, financial, and military, I would say that if I had to put my mortgage on the line in a bet, I would say that the dollar is going to be around and much stronger than people think for an extended period of time, measured in many, many years. I think there will be a strong push this year, and I think the pushback is what's interesting to try to model. And so that's where I would come down sort of on a prediction basis, which means you should probably take the other side, because sometimes we're a pretty good contra on these things. And before we go on, I just want to say a point of clarity of something I said earlier, but I want to correct it. One of the two Nord Stream 2 pipelines is still operational. The other one was damaged, but there still does exist at least one artery under the sea that connects Russia to Germany. And if peace were to break out, that could be a source that at least partially replaces the volume that came in through Nord Stream 1. As soon as I said it, I spoke imprecisely, and I wanted to sort of correct the record.
Okay, so just on that point, so let's say this is not going to happen probably, but let's say peace breaks out tomorrow, and Europe and Russia kiss and make up faster than anyone can imagine, and they just want to start getting gas through that thing. I know it has yet to have delivered gas, at least at scale. Is it that turnkey, or would it actually take some time?
Yeah, pretty much turnkey. It's pressurized and ready to go. If necessity removes a lot of barriers in life, and so again, if they kissed and made up, it wouldn't. There's not much left to do in order to have gas flowing again, and Russia has openly said as much, which is why I had it in the back of my head that Nord Stream was undamaged, but in fact, it's just one of the two pipelines, not both, which I've since remembered while answering your other questions.
Okay, and volume wise, at let's say maximum capacity, how much of what could have been pumped through Nord Stream 1 could 2 handle? Is it as big, bigger, smaller?
It's I believe they're similar in design, and so it would be half of what Nord Stream 1 was doing because there were 2 pipelines as well. And so 3 of the 4 pipelines that constitute the Nord Stream pipelines were damaged, but 1 still remains. So you would have half of the volume, let's say roughly. But the supply chain for getting LNG out of the West Coast, out of the Gulf Coast of the U.S. and from Qatar and Australia, that supply chain now has been implemented, and so you probably could get by with just one of the 2 pipelines if they kissed and made up. Yeah, I think, put it this way, turning back on the remaining Nord Stream 2 pipeline would go a long way towards, I think prices would crater, and I think supply would be assured, and I think much of the damage to the industrial sector of Germany could potentially even be reversed. So yeah, the prize of peace remains. And when we first wrote about the Nord Stream pipeline destruction, we thought all 4 had been damaged and that this would be irreversible. And we thought that this would condemn Europe to an extended conflict in a way, because you removed the sort of the prize of achieving peace and the motivation for it.
Right, exactly. So it's nice that there's, sort of an incentive here towards peace. And who knows if, what's going to happen, but at least there is an outcome here that can be used as a lever for healing and repair between the countries, as opposed to if it had just been totally destroyed, you wouldn't have that opportunity or that incentive.
Correct.
All right. I've got a ton of questions that we're just not going to get to, so I'm going to try to wrap this up here. But since we spent so much time talking about natural gas, and it's such a big resource, at least here in America, obviously the world has scrambled to try to, the U.S. has scrambled to try to export more natural gas to Europe in the wake of the Ukraine invasion and the Nord Stream sabotage. Has that resulted in any sort of permanent change in the natural gas market and policy? Like, are we going to become a much more aggressive exporter of natural gas as a result of this?
I think so. I mean, we have plans to build more. And the big winner in all this, of course, is Qatar. And we wrote a piece pointing out the fact that as much as Germany was complaining about the treatment of these transient workers and the country's stance on, say, rights for LGBT movement and so on, they still ultimately had to go and sign a long-term contract with Qatar that basically brings imports from Qatar into Germany all the way through till 2040, and we suspect beyond. And the piece was titled "Molecular Delusions," and the social preview for it was, with physics on its side, Qatar makes a mockery of Germany's empty platitudes. Like, you can correctly point out how flawed much of Qatar's social stances are and how it treats its foreign labor. But in the end, they hold the molecules, and if you want them, you got to come to the table and pay the price. And they did,
right.
And so they have. And so, the permanent changes to this market, of course, in the long run, all arbitrages are removed and markets become more efficient and interconnected. And that's what we're going to see in the natural gas market. And the U.S. in particular is playing a really important role, and frankly, is one of the biggest beneficiaries of the destruction of 3 of the 4 Nord Stream pipelines. And so, take that in the spirit in which it was intended. But, yes, absolutely, I think natural gas is going to be a key part. And then, even within the U.S., we see this ongoing attack on the consumption of natural gas via attacking pipelines, or in a piece we're going to publish when this podcast publishes, the attack on the American furnace is going to be one of the big major themes in 2023 and beyond, we believe.
All right, and you have a piece coming out, I think maybe the day that this interview is going to launch. So I wish we had more time to go more deeply into that thesis, but can you just give us sort of the 60 seconds on it? Yeah,
the words of 2023 will be heat pump. Put that in quotes and stick that in the back of your mind, because the heat pump will probably supersede solar panel in the obsessive nature with which the environmental movement will insist that existing furnaces that burn predominantly natural gas be replaced with what are essentially sophisticated air conditioning units that have the capability of both heating and cooling a home, thereby electrifying more and more of our home heating needs in lieu of burning fossil fuels in your furnace. And natural gas burns pretty cleanly and is very effective, and many homes enjoy their natural gas furnaces. And in particular, we were motivated to write this piece by two things. One, the state of California has banned the sale of new furnaces starting in 2030. California is always the first to lead its population over the energy cliff. And then second, the Inflation Reduction Act includes substantial tax benefits and credits and so on for the installation of heat pumps in homes to replace furnaces. There's a whole variety of issues with heat pumps that makes them, I believe, suboptimal to furnaces, including noise and their ability to handle extreme cold just when you need it the most and so on. But in our piece, instead of bemoaning the policy, we decided to swim with the current and to just predict who the winners will be. And there's some surprising winners. Of course, whenever the government doles out tens of billions of dollars, there's somebody receiving that on the other end of it. And then in particular, the private equity firms are really gearing up for a massive revolution in the way that people heat their homes. We suspect that this will be expensive. It will take a very long time. It will cost the taxpayers copious amounts of money and do next to nothing for the environment, which is the classic ESG grift. And heat pump will be, the words heat pump will be all over the place in 2023. The propaganda on it will be thick. And very soon, even owning a natural gas furnace will make you a planet hater.
Okay.
And
sorry, go ahead.
The piece is titled "A Home Near You," and it's publishing on Tuesday morning, which I think is around the time when this podcast will publish as well.
All right, great. Well, folks, heat pumps, you heard it here first. Go read it on Doomberg's Substack. Doomberg will give you a chance in just a sec to promote the URL for that. Real quick though, so can't let you go without, since this is at the end of the day, a wealth building and investing channel. We talked a lot about, at least sort of in natural gas and the shift of global energy trades. That is going to be, I'm sure, unlocking potential investment opportunities for investors who can kind of skate towards where the puck is heading. From an investing standpoint, are there any, besides investing in companies that build heat pumps, are there any particular opportunities right now that these changes in the energy space are offering to investors that really have your attention?
Sure. So actually, I wouldn't invest in the makers of heat pumps. And as we outlined in the piece, the real winners are going to be the HVAC company operators, the sales and more importantly, the servicing of these new units as they get installed. We also highlighted the refrigerants, and there's sort of a couple of factors that are going to drive significant demand for the whole refrigerant supply chain, which most people are completely unaware of, which involves recycling and in fact, even incinerating these things at very specialized facilities. And we're going through both a change out of the standard refrigerant, because these things are pretty toxic and have substantial global warming potential. And of course, everybody remembers how refrigerants were responsible for the ozone layer depletion and so on. There's a simultaneously a change out of what the standard sort of friendly refrigerant will be while we're putting all this new demand on HVAC companies to install these heat pumps and replace furnaces. And so that's a little bit of a deep cut. Broadly speaking, I think any investment that catalyzes an arbitrage of the global energy markets between oil, natural gas, and coal will do well. And if you see arbitrages, you want to get sort of long the undervalued one and short the overvalued one if you have the right margin requirements. And so as a general rule, we look to where things must go eventually as a guide. And so, for example, it can't be that coal will trade at an energy value higher than oil indefinitely. And we think regression to the mean is always a safe trade. And we would look for opportunities like that through the lens of physics.
All right. Folks will be looking at the prices of these, particular, energy commodities and looking for periods where they get extremely overvalued, undervalued. Most people aren't energy commodity market experts. So my guess is, I would say is, read players like you. I assume, in your Substack, when you see something really get out of whack or be at risk of reversion to the mean, that's one of the things that you flag for your readers. True?
Yes, absolutely. And again, not an investment newsletter. And our goal is to educate people so they can discover their own leads and do their own due diligence and see what the particular investment strategies make the most amount of sense for their individual portfolios. Because as you know, everybody's kind of unique in what they need and what's appropriate for them, given the risk factors involved in constructing a portfolio.
Right. And of course, that's a big fat softball to what I say on this program in every video, which is unless you are a highly experienced investor in general, but specifically in the area that we're talking about right now, we highly recommend that you work under the guidance of a professional financial advisor that has experience, I would say in all of the macro issues that Doomberg and I have been talking about in this video, but specifically if you're really trying to trade energy opportunities. Work with a financial advisor who's got a demonstrated track record in understanding that market and knowing what types of trades to put together, especially to take advantage of the type of sort of arbitrage opportunities that Doomberg mentioned here. If you're experienced, great. If you've got a great advisor who can already do that, great. But if not, feel free to talk with one of the ones that Wealthion endorses. It's totally free. There's no commitment to work with them. They just offer it as a public service to help educate people and get them better positioned. But obviously, they'll give you a sense of what a financial advisor, who does understand this type of space, looks like, so that you can either continue to talk with them if you want to, or use that knowledge to go find one that you like even better. And to do that, just go to wealthion.com, fill out the quick short form there. All right, Doomberg. So for folks that have enjoyed this conversation, maybe learning about you and your work for the first time, where should they go specifically to follow you and your work?
Yeah, all of our work is available at doomberg.substack.com. We are 100% subscriber supported, which means we do not accept ads or sponsorships. And as we always say, there's nothing wrong with those models. But given how provocative we would like to be, we thought having complete editorial freedom to research and publish the things that we felt were important was a prime concern for our brand. And so we are subscriber supported. For free email, subscribers get pretty comprehensive previews to all of our pieces, and then our paid subscribers get full access to both all of our current and go-forward pieces, but the full historical archive as well. We've now published more than 160 pieces since we've started, if you can believe that, and it's been an amazing ride. And it's truly the work of our lives. We love doing it, publishing 6 to 8 pieces per month with a consistent cadence on topics of interest in the headlines. And we're not afraid to make predictions, and we're not afraid to admit when we're wrong. And so that's kind of the fun part of Doomberg as well. And we put a high priority on quality and publication, the charts and the photoshops and the writing and the editing. We aspire to be a very premium, high quality newsletter, and our customers have rewarded us accordingly. So thanks again, Adam, for having us on, and really wishing you and your family and your business associates a wonderful and prosperous 2023. And looking forward to coming back anytime you'll have us. Anytime I see an invite from you, it shoots to the top of our priority because you're such a high-class person and run such a great organization.
You are very kind. And look, this is a mutual admiration society. I have huge respect for what you guys are doing and what you've been able to accomplish in the relatively short time your service has been around, because Doomberg and Wealthion actually launched around the same time in 2021. Have loved following your work, your progress, obviously the difference that you're making in the world. I am a huge fan, and this is based on the work I did before even founding Wealthion, of your efforts to really awaken the world's attention to the just incredibly entwined relationship between the energy system and the economy. You guys take it even further and say, life in general, which I believe is absolutely true. Way too few people really understand the essentiality of energy to really everything that we depend on, everything that we want to have happen in the future. And you guys are carrying that torch, and you're doing it in your words, at a very premium and high quality way, which I think you're not one of the best out there. I think you're the best out there doing this. And I highly recommend that everybody go check you out who isn't already following you. I appreciate your comments about coming on the channel. I think we're going to have you on a fair amount more in 2023 versus 2022, Doomberg, just because there are so many other topics that we didn't get to here. I had deep dives based on all, just some of your recent work into the solar industry, into hydropower, into really the opportunity of limitless zero carbon power being offered by the nuclear energy, and that's not even having to worry about fusion in the future. But you've also recently written a lot of pieces in the crypto space and on CBDCs, the central bank digital currencies. So there's just a whole river of other potential really interesting, very important topics that I think really should pick your brain on for the benefit of the Wealthion audience here. So to the extent you're willing to come back on this channel later this year, would love to have you back on.
Anytime. And despite all of those amazing topics, we're publishing on the private equity swarm into HVAC tomorrow, just to show you that there's never going to be a shortage of things for us to write about and by extension for us to discuss on this podcast. So looking forward to coming back and talking about all of those things anytime you'll have us, Adam. And again, really, really great time.
All right. Such a pleasure. Well, look, folks, if you've enjoyed having Doomberg, if you've enjoyed this conversation with Doomberg, you'd like to see them back on this channel, as well as other great quality minds like them, do us a favor, support this channel by hitting the like button, then clicking on the red subscribe button below, as well as that little bell icon right next to it. And just because we're recording this on January 2nd, the beginning of the year, I know that one of the most common resolutions out there for people is losing weight, getting back in shape. And so there's a piece that I've written years ago that I bring out at the beginning of every year for folks that have that New Year's resolution. So if you do, just go to wealthion.com/weight loss, and you'll be able to see a very science-based, very effective process laid out for folks that are looking to get a little bit more fit and a little more trim in 2023. And the reason why I put that together and flag it for folks is simply because I know it works. I know it works because it's a process that I went through. If you go read that piece, you'll see the before and after photos of myself. And my guess is you'll be pretty shocked, particularly on what the before photos look like. But I do like to show that every year because I know what an important goal that is for a lot of people. And I want to give folks the inspiration that change, positive change like that is indeed possible. With that, Doomberg, thanks so much for yet another great discussion. Wishing you and the Doomberg team the absolute best of 2023s, and look forward to having you back on this channel soon.
You bet. And great time as always. Talk to you soon.
All right, everybody else, thanks so much for watching.